USCHO.com.
Welcome to USCHO Weekend Review for Monday, January 30th, 2023. Each week we look back at the highlights of the weekend and the news of the week. This podcast is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida. Secure your seats at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. Well, I don't know if anybody knows this analogy anymore, but it is like a broken record. Once again, number one goes down again. St. Cloud State actually got swept by Minnesota Duluth 5-3 and 6-3. And this brings up a couple of questions. And I think I'm going to make the first one a two-part question. Is there an inherent pressure to being the number one team that maybe we don't realize? Also, if you are the challenger against the number one team, do you get a little extra motivation out of that?
Well, I'll take the second part of it because I think I've been on the other end of it. We've beat the number one team twice. You get up for those games, whether you're the 7th ranked, whether you're the 14th ranked, whether you're the 50th ranked, you get up for those games. And there's a pressure. There's a pressure on being number one because you're going to get everybody's best game because you want the headlines, you want the glory, you want the difference-making thing for a program. I mean, programs use that all the time. Swept the number one team in the nation, beat the number one team in the nation. Arizona State used it earlier in the year when they beat the number one team in the PairWise. So it's being used, and those are things that hype the team up. That's the challenger and the pressure that they face. It's not a pressure where they're like, oh my God, we're the number one team in the nation, because you don't think of it. The pressure is bringing your best game because you're going to get their best game. So there's no like, oh, I'm the number one team, I've got a this, and this. The pressure is you're going to get their top game. You're going to get their best game. So you have to be prepared. And obviously, difference maker, program making, whatever you want to call it, when you beat the number one team in the nation, you hang your hat on that.
Yeah, I 100% agree. And it is difficult as that number one team because you have that target on your back. You're going to get the best game, but you also feel like, maybe you don't get all the calls because you're the number one team. I've heard. I
don't agree with that.
You don't think so? I've heard.
No, especially non-conference. If you're the underdog sometimes, you're the number one team. You're getting protected all the way. If it's non-conference, come on.
Well, this one was in NCHC play, and for Minnesota Duluth, I'm sure that they were anxious to play this game. They've been looking to make a statement all season, and it's been a struggle to do so. You need those weekends eventually. And you knew that this was a team that could turn it around. The timing, the fact that it's against the number one team in the country at that point, the odds are you could have had a couple of opportunities. Denver was number one at times this year. We'll probably get another chance at some point this season. I mean, it's kind of crazy the musical chairs that has been the number one team over the whole season. I mean, nobody has stuck at number one for, I don't think, any more than 3 weeks, 3 playing weeks. I think over the Christmas break, that might be the longest anybody was able to stay at number one.
I think you stay at number 2, you hold there, you let the number one team take the pressure, and you go from there. But I love the term that you just used, target on their backs, because you're going to get everybody's best game. RIT a couple years ago, after they went to the Frozen Four, they actually literally had targets on their back, so their workout shirts. And that when you're the top team, you're getting everybody's best game.
Yeah.
But the question I have for you, Jimmy, and you said it right there in the Duluth, and maybe Ed, you want to jump in on this. Is Minnesota Duluth back, or do they just have a good weekend? That's the question that needs to be answered.
Well, I guess we answer that over the next 2 weeks. If you suddenly, take a big step forward and then get swept in a week or two, then you can see maybe it was just a blip on the radar, and maybe it's not the true team, but that this team has talent. We know that part. We've seen it. I know that they've gone through some injuries this season. I hope to talk to Scott Sandelin at some point this week, but I feel like it can be the stepping stone to success, but it's what you do afterwards that really matters.
Well, it all depends on how you define success. It's going to be tough for them in the PairWise. They're sitting at number 24. They're a game below 500 right now. They've got, it looks like 8 regular season games left. You could get to a pretty good record with that, but it's probably going to be the case that they're going to have to do well through the NCHC playoffs to have some postseason hopes. But yeah, maybe it is a turnaround. Maybe they get to the point where they can sneak their way into the top 4 if they can string some together.
So when we beat Miami, I used that actually the next weekend in our pregame speech, because all the eyes are going to be on Duluth to see if that is. So I talked to our team leading up to playing Alabama Huntsville. People will say that's a fluke. People will use that as a fluke if we don't follow through here. And actually we used it as a springboard, and we went 5-1 or 4-1-1, something to that. I remember a tie in there, but we use that as a springboard. But that is something that you need to be aware of if you're Duluth, that people will forget about you as quick as they're talking about you if you don't follow up on it.
Well, let's take a look at a team that did have a turnaround after getting swept the weekend before in conference. The Connecticut Ice tournament had Sacred Heart, UConn, Yale, and host team Quinnipiac. The Bobcats won the first game 5-0 over Sacred Heart, a 4-3 win over UConn. It was something they needed to do after a couple of losses, and now they have bragging rights for another year in the state of Connecticut.
Oh, well, good comebacks for Quinnipiac. The win over UConn, especially, they had to come from behind in the third period in that game, got a goal with about 14 or so minutes left, and then the game winner in the closing seconds of regulation. That's pretty impressive. Derek, I'll let you give your thoughts, and then I have some thoughts on the tournament itself.
Well, I think Quinnipiac's the prime one. Everybody was like, Quinnipiac was on everybody's mind as being the best. But until they became number 1, then they got the target on their back, and then people started questioning them. Really good bounce back, commanding win over in the first game, and then to win the tournament. Obviously it's not a neutral ice tournament; it's a home tournament because the NCAA, is going to count those as home games for Quinnipiac. But I don't see them going to number 1. I see Minnesota probably, if I had a vote, being number 1. I think Quinnipiac is a really good 1 seed that doesn't really want to be the number 1 seed. A really good 1 seed in the tournament, but doesn't want to be the number 1 overall seed. I think that fits them very well in just kind of letting you forget about them a little bit, kind of like Denver.
The one thought I wanted to give on the tournament, this stuff I was reading on social media this weekend, it sounds like Quinnipiac made it almost impossible to buy tickets to this tournament because they only wanted their fans to be able to go to the games. They did not want the other 3 teams represented. And I guess in the games that Quinnipiac was not playing, that was quite obvious. It was empty stands, which is too bad because I think a lot of this tournament is supposed to be resemble what we see up here in Boston. We'll see it the next few weeks for the Bean Pod, where you can, pack a bunch of fans into a big building and make it kind of almost it feels like a true neutral site game, especially when you get to the championship game and you get half and half in the building in terms of fans. Because if UConn fans were allowed to buy tickets to that game, they would have. It would have been a good representation. I know only a few UConn fans were able to get in there. I don't like that. I feel like this is an event. Start putting it in a neutral site. If this is the way you're going to handle it, put it in. I don't know. Is it still Webster Bank Arena? I don't think it is. Put it in the XL.
Total Mortgage this year.
Put it in the XL Center. Put it in someplace else. Don't put it on campuses if you're gonna be playing some kind of games on trying to limit fans from other schools from attending, because it's not a state of Connecticut championship. It's a Quinnipiac tournament. Then
is it a rotating? I mean, because it was in Bridgeport last year. Is it going to go to UConn? Is it going to go?
I think that's the the goal of the tournament, I believe. But if one school is going to start playing these games, then you're going to see other schools do it. I just feel like if you want this tournament to be serious and taken seriously and make it something that can sustain for a long time, start getting a neutral site for it.
Well, it's two. The first 2 years were in Bridgeport, I believe, correct?
I think you're right.
So then this happens. I mean, Ed, you're like you said, turnabout's going to be fair play. Now, nobody's going to let Quinnipiac have tickets moving forward. So
right. And part of it also may have to do with the loss of SNY as a sponsor. It was hard to even find video of this stuff online.
I was told that the games were put on SNY.
Well, they weren't on ESPN Plus because I looked. I looked for the first game at 4 o'clock on Friday.
They were not.
And was disappointed to find that I couldn't find it.
And if you were smart with a VPN, you could pretend you were in a foreign country and watch the international stream. But it sounds like a few things need to be fixed there. You know, this was supposed to be Connecticut's bean pot. And now, bringing this up, that doesn't sound like they're approaching it with the same sort of balance.
You said it all. You said it all.
Well, let's go on to the next one. Michigan. Jim, when we were talking on our USCHO Edge podcast on Friday, we were talking a little bit about Penn State having a lot of momentum and going in there. 7-3 loss on Friday, 5-4 loss for Penn State to Michigan on Saturday, including really a come-from-behind victory for Michigan. Luke Hughes with 4 goals, 3 even strength and 1 on the power play. But even with the 2 wins, Michigan dropped in the PairWise. There's so many moving parts in the PairWise, which we shouldn't even really call it the PairWise anymore. It should be the RPI with a couple tiebreakers is really what it's turned into. I mean, really, the PairWise is, except for one position up or down with head-to-head or common opponents, it's essentially a finagled and massaged and jury-rigged RPI, and I'll get to that, I suppose, in a little bit more when we talk about it. What I mean by that is year after year, when they look at results, things change a little bit to try to get the teams in that they would like based on the formula, and it changes over the years. And I know, Derek, you were on the committee for a while, and you saw when you would get presentations onto that. But what does this say about the strength of the Big Ten, and what does this say for BU? Although BU has some games removed from their RPI that would lower it, their sweep over BC in that home-and-home series allowed the Terriers to move into third. Anyway, the games and the numbers, what do you guys think about all that?
Well, I'll touch on the part that you asked. Every year you sit through a presentation as a tournament committee member, and they try to figure out ways to make it better. I know the women are using a different format than the PairWise. Now, my last year on the committee, I should have had one more year, but I had to go off when we didn't have a program. I think that may be coming sooner than later. And I think if the women have success, now I don't know the intricacies of it. I don't remember the intricacies of it, and I don't remember the name of it. But I know that the women use a different thing. They're actually the ones that went to the higher percentage first in the 3-on-3 overtime. So I think that there's a lot of things, a lot of moving parts that will be happening in the PairWise. And it's amazing, Ed, and I know you're going to get to it, what the comparisons with RIT and Holy Cross coming up. But to see teams fluctuate as little as possible. I mean, a week ago we were talking, or 2 weeks ago we were talking Penn State is the number 1 seed. I asked you, is Penn State a number 1 team, number 1 seed? And you both said right now, according to numbers, yes. Well, now, according to numbers, they're not. So they didn't win the games. I think it still comes down to winning the games on the ice. And the more you win, the better you are. Look at RIT. RIT is 15. They won games on the ice. And we asked, will they be able to stay there? They keep getting points every game. You get points every game, you're going to stay there. And we'll see if they can continue to do that.
Yeah, just pulling up the RPI right now, because Ed, I'm going to agree with you. This is, the PairWise is nothing more than a glorified RPI. It could be the switch here could be as simple as that. The fact that Boston University won one of their games on the road, while Michigan won both of their games this weekend at home. So, and they're so close. They're separated by 4 thousandths of a point in the RPI right now. 4 1,000ths of a point. So think about that. That's pretty close. I know it's not a 10,000th of a point that we've referenced before, but that's still very close. So if you just, if the little bonus that you could get from, a 1.2 multiplier for a win as opposed to 2.8 multipliers, BU only got it one night. Of course, they were only on the road one night, but that's something that probably was the move. I don't think it reflects on the strength of the leagues at all. It's really more just about where the games were played this weekend. And we have to forget that every time we look at the PairWise on an individual weekend by weekend basis, all it is a tiny snapshot of a large season. By the time we get to March 18th, the full picture will be drawn. And then that's technically the only day that the PairWise is relevant. We can watch it all season. We can watch the fluctuation. We can have great discussions with it. That's what, that's a big benefit of the PairWise. But at the same time, the only day it matters is the day after all of the regular season and postseason tournament games are played.
Well, you mentioned what happened with RIT and the PairWise, a win and an overtime loss over the weekend at Holy Cross, yet they moved up a couple of positions. And that didn't happen until the last game was played between Alaska Anchorage and Fairbanks to wrap up the weekend. It finally, and it's 1/1000th of a point in separation. But here's why that happened. Those teams played overtime games twice this season. Last weekend in October, they were at RIT. RIT won the first night, won in overtime the second night, lost in overtime the second night at Holy Cross this past weekend. The win at home and the overtime win at home, because you get 0.8 of a win at home and 1.2 of a win on the road for RPI purposes. RIT got 1.333 wins at home out of a win and an overtime win, and got 1.6 wins out of it for a win and an overtime loss on the road. So losing on the road in overtime was better for the RPI than winning at home in overtime. So that's why you have that. And so when you have teams splitting in regulation and you get that extra point, like you said, Derek, that makes the difference. And again, with all the moving parts and the home and road, that home and road difference really figures in there very, very strongly. And that's exactly what you said, Jim, with BU getting one of those wins on the road at BC. That really helped them out. That was like 2 full wins. If they had swept at home, it would have been 1.6.
Yeah, I mean, it's a lot of math, but you nailed it right there. And the other thing, too, I think you said 1/10th of a point is separating.
No, 1/1000th.
Well, it's actually 1/10,000th of a point.
1/10,000.
It's a 0.5348 for RIT, 0.5347 for Michigan State, and 0.5346 for Omaha. Okay. So that's how close those 3 teams literally can flip on the difference between a tie and an overtime win. An overtime win and a shootout. I mean, all of those things can be flipped. A home road, somebody gets a quality win bonus point by, beating one of your teams that you've beat throughout the season goes into the top 15 in the RPI. Now you suddenly might get, 0.003 in the quality win bonus, and that catapults you to 3 places in the RPI. That is how crazy and how dynamic the PairWise is.
Ed, I will tell you, if this helps our RIT, it'll be changed next year.
Well, there's a long history of changing things that help Atlantic hockey. Remember when Holy Cross in 2006, when they beat Minnesota in the first round, when Holy Cross won Atlantic hockey and went in, if it had been Bentley winning that championship in the league, both Bentley and Holy Cross would have been in under the old format. What they do the next year, they changed it to make sure that wouldn't happen. So,
and it happened one year with Quinnipiac when it was the MAC.
Yep.
Quinnipiac was like 4th, and they came out to play us at Air Force, and we swept them, and that just ended their opportunity. They would have been in no matter what. I remember having that conversation with George Gwozdecki the week before, and he's like, "You got to do this for college hockey." I was like, "What? What are you talking about?" You have to beat Quinnipiac.
Well, we're going to take a quick break. We've got other big performances over the weekend that we'll run through, and also a quick breakdown of the PairWise by league. That's when we come back. Weekend Review is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th, 2023 at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida.
All right, class, it's the NCAA Men's Frozen Four. Welcome to Fandom 101. Want to help your team rule the rink? Here's your assignment. Lesson 1, go big for every goal. 2, when you bring enough for the whole class. And 3, attendance is encouraged, but passion is mandatory. The NCAA Men's Frozen Four, April 6th and 8th at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida. Buy your tickets today at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. Class dismissed.
We're back with USCHO Weekend Review. I'm Ed Trefzger alongside Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley. We talked about some stuff from the past weekend, but there were a lot of other big performances over the weekend. Top of the list, how about Maine getting a home sweep over Providence? Maine was outshot 52-21 on Saturday, but won 3-0. Victor Osman getting the big shutout. But terrific for Ben Barr's team. It seems like it's been turning around a battleship a little bit, but getting a little bit more full steam ahead to continue the analogy for the Black Bears this season.
You know what? It was interesting. I was calling the BCBU series on Nesson this weekend and doing some research and prep, and somebody passed along some stats that showed the top 5 performing teams since November 1st, I think it was. And you had BU was number 1, BC was 2, I believe it was Lowell was 3, Merrimack was 4. I was surprised to realize Maine was 5th. Maine had going into this weekend had the 5th best record. That's actually probably with their 2 wins. That's actually probably improved. You know, they might even have a better mark now than BC does over that span. So hats off. I know that Ben Barr will succeed at Maine. He's a great coach. It's a program that, man, do they care? And they will, maybe boycott you a little when you are horrible, but when you get a little bit of success, they're back in the building. And those were 2 pretty electric crowds that I saw up in Orono watching some tape this weekend. So hats off, Maine. Providence, that's a tough one for Nate Lehman. I know they've been going through a little bit lately with some injuries, but that stings because those 2 losses will make it very, very hard to even get good positioning in the regular season standings in Hockey East. Forget about an NCAA bid.
Yeah, it takes a while to turn around teams. You can't expect it overnight. You see I think the biggest thing is you see like an Adam Nightingale or Jay Pandolfo go into these flagship blue blood programs and have success. Maine is so far removed from that blue blood status that it's going to take a while for Ben Barr to do that. And not saying that like BU isn't that far removed from being in the NCAA tournament. Michigan State was there, I believe, with Tom Manassas and went through some tough times, but their league is so good, it turned around quickly. So you see all these quick fix-it-up jobs, and you've got to remember that Maine has been so, I think since Timmy Whitehead almost, they've struggled a little bit since they won the national championship. And, you got to have some patience. And like you said, Jimmy, they'll boycott you, but, he's doing a great job and kind of figuring out a little bit of what's making them go and what's successful. I mean, so we'll see if it continues, but that's a really good win for them. I believe they're close to 500. And I think if they hit the 500 record for the year, I think that will be a success to build on for next year. So I would imagine right now their goal is probably to get home ice and finish above 500.
Yeah, 11, 12, and 2, 1 game under 500. But then you look at where they've moved in the Hockey East standings. They were down the bottom just 2 weeks ago, and now with a few wins They moved into 8th place. That would be a home game in the first round of the Hockey East playoffs. Right now, they would host Vermont, another team that's playing well, but they've got a pretty big gap between them and Vermont. So, an even further gap between New Hampshire and UMass, who are down the bottom of the standing. So, the thought that Maine, probably sneaks into one of those home ice spots in the opening round is pretty legit, and that would be big to host a playoff game back in Orono.
Surprised that you spoke about UMass having to go on the road?
I mean, they're in dead last place right now. It's kind of crazy. They're losing a lot of close games, but they've got their struggles right now, and they're real.
Notre Dame got a sweep of Wisconsin 5-3 and 3-1 at home, but it has been reported both in the newspaper and by Notre Dame radio that their leading scorer, Ryder Ralston, was lost in Saturday's game. So that's not good news for the Fighting Irish, but a couple of key wins for Jeff Jackson's squad.
You don't want to lose your leading scorer, especially when you're a team that hasn't scored a ton of goals this year. And they have been of late, but a guy like Ralston is a phenomenal player on this team. And everything I read, I think it was Darren Pritchett had, put a tweet out yesterday. It sounded like this is serious. Like it's not a be back, in a couple of weeks. This sounds like it could be season ending for Ralston, which is just heartbreaking. So you need those wins. And right now, standings wise, Notre Dame, continuing to try to climb up. And obviously every win is good for their PairWise as well. They are really close to second place in the Big Ten, just 1 point out of second. Everybody's played the same number of games at this point, except Ohio State, who's in front of them. But they can climb up into a top 2, top 3 spot. I don't think anybody is catching Minnesota, but it's going to be hard to do it. They're going to have to find a way to have that next man up mentality. And my memory of Jeff Jackson teams is he's found a way to make things better out of less. I don't ever want to say out of nothing because he always has a lot of talent on that roster, but that's a big loss. So we'll see how this team can bounce back from it. Amazing
the tight race between, I guess it's 2 and 6. 2 and 6. 3 points separates Penn State and Michigan between 2 and 6. Michigan also has 2 games in hand besides Ohio State at 24 points. So they've got the ability there. I mean, there's a lot of flipping that's going on. I think, like you said, it's going to be tough to catch Minnesota and Wisconsin. And it's going to be tough to catch Michigan. I mean, they're with 9 points right now and 3 wins in the Big Ten. That's got to be a big disappointment right there. But, Michigan, 3 points out of second place with 2 games in hand. Ohio State tied for second with 2 games in hand. So this is an interesting race for second place. And I believe that there's Minnesota's the only one that'll get a bye and then everybody will play. But I think that you really probably want to get Wisconsin in the first round. And I think that's what a lot of teams are playing for. By the way, one note on Wisconsin. This one comes from Darren Pritchett, who I just mentioned, radio voice of Notre Dame. Wisconsin has lost 18 straight Big Ten road games. Since Cole Caulfield left, they have 1 conference road win. That's pretty remarkable. Well, let's take a look at the CCHA. 4 points separate third place Bowling Green from first place Minnesota State, and 3 points behind the Mavericks is Michigan Tech. Big weekends both for Minnesota State and Michigan Tech. Let's talk Minnesota State first. The Mavericks have won 8 in a row, swept Ferris State over the weekend. We were kind of wondering about Minnesota State a few weeks ago, but they sure have straightened things out. And they're doing it with good defense and goaltending. That's everybody questioned that, what they would be like without Dryden McKay. I get it, but they're finally putting together some really good defensive performances. Just 2 goals against this weekend, 3 goals against the weekend before, 1 goal against the weekend before that. Kind of an explosive 5 goals against when they went to Northern Michigan, but they won those 2 games 5-2 and 5-3. I mean, that's a nice little run that they're on.
You have to go all the way back to December 15th, 16th when they got swept by Bemidji the last time they lost. But they have righted the ship, and they've put themselves in really good position in terms of not just the standings in their conference, but obviously the pairwise as well. I think that it feels like, I know that Bowling Green and Bemidji are still technically in this race in the CCHA, but it feels like this is almost about to become a 2-horse race between Minnesota State and Michigan Tech, because both of those teams seem to be playing their best hockey right now.
I'll take you one step further. It looks like a 4. There's a separation. Ferris still technically can catch Bemidji, but there's a separation. But Michigan Tech, you've brought that 2-horse race. They're going to have to earn that horse because they've got 6 games left. They played Bemidji twice away, Bowling Green twice at home, and then they have to go to Minnesota State. You're talking the top 4. There it is. And if Michigan Tech really wants to kind of see where they're at in that mix, they're gonna have to earn it. And conversely, you've got. I mean, obviously, we talked about the Bemidji Michigan Tech game. You've got Minnesota State in their final 6. They've got St. Thomas and then Bemidji and Michigan Tech. So they do have a little bit of a buffer in St. Thomas, but they've been playing well lately too. So everybody's got a little bit of a hard schedule down the stretch there. Without looking too deep into what Bemidji has left, we have mentioned them twice. They do have 2 games in hand, but, I wouldn't say that those other 2 teams are out because of the schedule, how it is. Somebody's going to have to win out to win the league, basically.
Well, I got to tell you, hats off to Don Lucia and his office for a great schedule, which will basically make the last 2 weekends some really big head-to-head matchups. Bemidji State playing Minnesota State, then Minnesota State and Michigan Tech playing each other. That schedule making it its finest. It's almost like you knew who you kind of had to make a guess. Who are they going to be the best teams? Let's find a way to get them all to play as much round robin hockey as we can down the stretch.
The flex schedule, like the NFL. I mean,
that's for TV though.
Well, you do have, here's Bowling Green, Ferris at home, at Tech, where they can gain some points, and then Northern at home. They're not too far out of the mix in this either. I mean, so if you're looking at that, I mean, they're what are they right now? They're 4 points out. I mean, they've got some easier games while the other 2 teams may be beating up on each other. And then you've got Bemidji, who does have the 2 games in hand. I mean, wow. I mean, like you said, hats off to Don Lucia and their schedule. Bemidji's got Tech, Ferris, Minnesota State, and then they end at St. Thomas. So there's some scoreboard watching going on there.
And imagine if it's a position that Bemidji needs some points on the last weekend to maybe climb into a first or second place, and it's a St. Thomas that could go and become the spoilers. That would be, I'm sure that Rico Blasi would love to do something like that.
Well, let's look at Harvard as we go around the country. It was a tough weekend for them last weekend against the bottom part of the ECAC, but they got wins at home over Colgate. It took overtime for that, and a big win over Cornell, 6-2. Harvard's only 2 points behind Quinnipiac in the standings, but Quinnipiac has a couple games in hand. But as they head towards Beanpot time, this has got to be good news for the Crimson.
Yeah, especially that Cornell win, a statement win at home. You need that because Harvard they pulled out a lot of good wins, and you can kind of even go to that Friday victory over Colgate and say, they trailed in that game. They trailed pretty late, if I remember, in that game, and then found a way to bounce back, get the overtime win. So they've been pulling out some games, but coaches, I know they don't love that. And then you look at they needed overtime on the road at Yale. Then they lose to Brown. Of course they had that loss to Quinnipiac back in early January. Things have been going really well for this Crimson team throughout much of the season, but when you get your rival on your home ice and you win 6-2, that's a statement win. And with the Beanpot coming up, there'll be plenty of emotional opportunities to play some big hockey. And I think that you always see some of the best players shine through in those big games. So I'm sure Ted Donato is looking at the Beanpot as a nice little tune-up for what they'll face in Lake Placid and maybe in a regional.
Yeah, I mean, you got the Beanpot, and this has been a tough schedule for a lot of, once again, Steve Hagwell and the schedule makers. You got Friday coming up here before the Beanpot, Quinnipiac and Harvard. You want to make a statement? They had Cornell and Quinnipiac back to back for Harvard, and I don't know if you can get any tougher than that.
No, and even the week in between the Beanpot, you still have to go up to Dartmouth, which is never an easy little trip for any team to make.
Yeah, speaking of which, let me just throw that in. We didn't have this on the roster, but it was travel partner weekend between St. Lawrence and Clarkson, and St. Lawrence got the sweep on the weekend, a huge deal for them.
That's big for St. Lawrence, I think. At this point, the way that the ECAC standings are kind of shaking out here, you've got Quinnipiac and Harvard at the top, Cornell, Colgate, but then it's what happens next. In St. Lawrence, they're now within shouting distance of getting that first round bye, that quarterfinal home ice spot, which nobody really wants to head up to the North Country for a playoff series. And they now have a little bit of separation, from even the thought. I don't even think they can anymore probably fall down into a bottom four spot in the league. So St. Lawrence made some hay this weekend in what was a really big series.
What I want to know is, did the commissioners all get together and say, let's have a rivalry week? Because you got it felt
like it. We've had two this season, and it does feel like it's
it's unbelievable. Like, you can go around the country. You just talked about the North Country. You had Harvard, Cornell. You had Air Force Army. You had the Alaska Governor's Cup. You had the Gold Pan with 19,000,
almost 20,000 in Denver. Great crowd.
Almost 20,000 people in Denver. I mean, that's a rivalry week. And I'm sure there's
BCBU playing two sold out games. Yeah, it does feel, because the first week in Denver in December felt like a rivalry week too. I can't remember exactly all the teams that played, and we left out UMass playing UMass Lowell this past weekend. It does feel like there was something intentional that was saying, take your best rivalries and put them in this weekend. And they've done it twice this year. And I think it works. They do it in basketball all the time.
I think we're just giving them too much credit.
I don't know. We'll probably hear from one of those commissioners.
Steve Metcalf, call us and let us know.
Will let us know if it's rivalry week or not. But it felt like it, and I love it. It was great to, I was broadcasting one, and we were referencing the others in the Open, because there were so many great games this weekend that were played among rivals.
And I mean, I watched some of the Air Force Army game. You can't beat that. You had the pageantry of that. They split. Then you have the seniors around the circle at the end. I mean, it's like I said, there were some really good rivalries that went on this weekend, and it was great. That's great for college hockey, especially the 19,000 people in Denver. First time they ever did that. And obviously it might not be the last.
And at Tate Rink at Army, the games were sold out well in advance, and they set a record for attendance on Friday night. So terrific. And no matter how well or how poorly either of those teams are playing, that rivalry is always terrific, as you can imagine.
As somebody who's been a part of that, it's first class, and it's hard nosed. It's physical, but the respect of each afterwards, it's unbelievable. And like you said, throw the records out. But I know it's big for both service academies, and what a great weekend of hockey that ends up being.
We're running out of time, but just a quick look around the PairWise by league. Right now, Atlantic Hockey has one team in the top 16, RIT at number 15 into this weekend, but the Big Ten, 6 teams are in the PairWise. Minnesota 1, Michigan 4, Penn State 6, Ohio State's in 8th, Notre Dame 14, and Michigan State 16. That's not going to be sustainable, but that does point to maybe 4 or 5 teams from the Big Ten being in the tournament.
Certainly. There's no doubt. I think that one of those will have to fall out because I see teams that are on the bubble from both the NCHC and Hockey East any of those teams start winning, and somebody has to. Not every one of those teams can lose. If some of those teams, whichever team starts winning from the bubble, will likely knock out somebody down the bottom, Notre Dame and Michigan State, unless those two teams go on heaters. That could, though, if you're going to put together some wins against some of the teams higher, that'll bring them down. There's a chance you could get 6 or 7 in the Big Ten. It's not the greatest chance. I'd say the odds right now are less than 50%, but what a statement that would be for that conference if they were to do that. Now, then you have to win the games. I can remember the year that I think Hockey East got 6 in, and none of them reached the Frozen Four. So stuff like that happens.
CCHA's got 2 teams. Michigan Tech tied for 11th. Minnesota State is 13th. We talked quite a bit about them. ECAC, Quinnipiac, 2nd, Harvard 8th, and Cornell 11th. Those are all 3 teams that stand a pretty good chance of the postseason.
I think so. Harvard is getting really close to clinching their spot. I'm just going to pull up my little handy dandy calculator here. They're right now about 90% to get in. Even Cornell, they're not as high, probably around 70%. But I think that you can probably expect at least 2 and probably 3 from the ECAC.
We're only a month beyond when we were talking about 5 or 6 teams from Hockey East being above the bubble. Right now, just 1. 3rd place in the PairWise is Boston University.
What really surprises me on this is the dramatic drop of UConn and especially Merrimack and the rise of Northeastern. I mean, we'll talk about teams that are going the opposite way in the PairWise. Connecticut, Merrimack, we thought in December those were, as much as you can in December, thinking those are locks, to now, and as much as you can think of Northeastern being out, they're going completely in the opposite directions. And I don't know how you stop that, because you think that it's a small bump, but this has become a pothole. This is not a bump anymore. This is a pothole. And it gets crazy to see that Hockey, if it ended today, would only have 1 team in the tournament.
Yeah, it's for both of those schools, UConn and Merrimack, it's just losses to the wrong teams at the wrong time. Merrimack, they've been on a skid, and then they lose, albeit in overtime, on the road, but to Vermont this weekend. That doesn't help them. I look at the bubble right now, and by the way, Northeastern, Frozen Fenway, I think, was 3 weekends ago, and as they walked on the ice against Boston, who do they play? They played UConn in the opening game. They beat them. Before that game, they were 40th in the PairWise. Now they're 20th. And they have about a 20% chance. I talked to Jerry Keefe last week. He said last year on February 1st, I know that we were 18th in the PairWise and we got in. Now they had to go 5-1 down the stretch to do that. They play Boston College tomorrow night, January 31st. If they win, they will probably be somewhere around 17th or 18th in the PairWise. So maybe Jerry Keefe, a little prophetic. I think he feels like his chances are good if they keep, and they are healthy. And if they keep playing the way they've been playing, they are a dangerous team. But
are we talking? These are UConn and Merrimack, and I don't want to beat up on them because they had really good starts and they've had good seasons, more than not as much per se as UConn, but Merrimack I don't know if they predicted this, but they were top 10 teams.
Right.
Correct.
Merrimack was number 3 in the PairWise at Christmas. That's a big drop.
And where do they go from here? You're going to have to really kind of almost run the table when you think. They're still kind of high in the hockey standings. They're still 3rd. So it's more of just their other, and UConn's 4th. So it's bizarre to see teams that high in their league drop so fast out of the PairWise. And
well, for Merrimack, it's a 2-6-1 stretch is what they've gone through. That's what does it, and that's a really difficult little stretch to go through. UConn, it has not been as bad. They had. A loss to Merrimack, a loss to BU, a couple of wins over LIU that don't move the needle. Then the 2 losses to Northeastern really set them back. And then they get on the winning ways, but against a UMass team that at one point was a nice bolster to your RPI and your pairwise, not anymore. And then a win over Yale and the opportunity to beat Quinnipiac on the road the other night. That would have been a big boost if UConn could have pulled that one out instead. And they didn't even get to overtime to get any points out of it, which is difficult.
Merrimack's going to need basically to sweep BU, right? Wouldn't you think? I mean, and take care of New Hampshire and Maine on the road. Those would be good wins for them, and then sweep BU, and they're back in the mix.
Sweep BU would be the formula. There's no doubt about that. They have a couple against UMass Lowell that could boost, but you have to be. It's the other games that are more. You have to be more cautious with at New Hampshire, at Maine, home against Vermont. You don't take care of those games, and you're in trouble.
Lastly, the NCHC right now, as it stands, would not have a number 1 seed in a regional. St. Cloud is 5th, Denver 7th, Western Michigan 10th. On the outside looking in, North Dakota at 19 and Minnesota Duluth at 24.
And I still say I have a gut that they're going to get a 4th team in. They just, you've got North Dakota is making a little bit of hay of late. They are about a 14% chance to get in. Where's Omaha on my chart? I thought that they were closer, but I guess
they're 17.
Oh, I left out Omaha. Yep, they're at 17. So they're very close, knocking on the door.
Yeah, I'm missing them on my chart, right? Oh, there they are. Yeah, they're about 36% to get in right now. So both of those teams could give it a run. Let's put it that way. I do feel pretty good about all three, St. Cloud, Denver, and Western all getting in though.
You know what's going to be the challenge of that? I mean, you're number 1 seed and you get Denver. I mean, in your bracket, you're number 1 seed and you get St. Cloud in your bracket. You're a number 1 or 2 seed and you get Western Michigan in your bracket. Those are.
Am I right? It's Denver at home again because are they the host of that regional?
Yeah, I believe Loveland was a couple years out. I know they had a couple years. I don't remember specifically. I know Loveland was a Western a couple times.
And this year it will be, it's Allentown this year. So it's Allentown and Fargo. So, but imagine if North Dakota sneaks in and you're the number 1 seed and you get North Dakota and Fargo.
Or Penn State is a number 2 seed.
Right. Yeah, exactly. In Allentown.
Mike Cross, who's on the committee as a Penn State hockey sports supervisor, will have to recuse himself from running that tournament. And he does such a good job, but that would be those 2 teams in would be big time for the regionals attendance wise.
Well, with that, we'll wrap things up. We'll just in passing mention that we're a little bit later in the year for teams really sewing things up in the pairwise. Usually the beginning of January, maybe the top 6 or 8 teams are already virtually locks. Maybe 4 teams are in that position now, maybe 5. We'll get into that more as we go on during the week, but we've run a little bit long and we got to wrap up. USCHO Weekend Review is sponsored by the NCAA Men's Division I Frozen 4, April 6th and 8th at Amalie Arena in Tampa, Florida. Get your tickets at ncaa.com/mfrozen4. Find our podcast at uscho.com/podcasts or subscribe on your favorite podcast app. For Jim Connelly and Derek Schooley, I'm Ed Trefzger, and this has been USCHO Weekend Review.